Ukrainian President Zelensky has asked the United States many times to declare a no-fly zone over his country. So far, the answer has been no. Taking that option off the table was a mistake, according to Raphael Cohen. He's the director of the Strategy and Doctrine program of RAND's Project Air Force. Rafi, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So first, explain to us the details of how a no-fly zone over Ukraine would work.
Sure. So a no-fly zone would be a coercive measure by the United States and presumably with its NATO allies. It would basically tell the Russians that any Russian aircraft that violates Ukrainian airspace would be shot down. As multiple commentators have noted, this would be akin to an act of war. So it needs to be taken seriously. That said, as I argued in my op-ed, I think taking it off the table entirely is a mistake.
How many American troops would be required to institute a no-fly zone? Because you would need actual troops on the ground in Ukraine to do this, right?
Not necessarily. You certainly would need aircraft flying over Ukraine to execute this. I mean, there's a variety of different ways you can execute it, and I'm not going to talk too much the operational specifics.
So American officials have categorically rejected a no-fly zone. Is your argument that it's the wrong strategy, or is it a messaging problem? It shouldn't have been announced openly.
So more the latter than the former. So I think it's important to understand that there are two questions here. One, should the United States take options off the table a priori? And two, is it a good idea to implement a no-fly zone right here and right now? And I think you can believe that the latter answer is no. The former answer is, however, is a mistake, which I do. And the real argument for that is sort of threefold. First off, we don't know what kind of actions Russians are going to take over the next couple of weeks or a couple months. So whatever red lines we have vis-a-vis Ukraine, the Russians very well may cross them. In fact, the intelligence community has already said as much, that Russia is likely to double down. Second, by taking American leverage off the table a priori by these grand statements, we lose leverage and we lose the ability to try to coerce Russia into a peaceful diplomatic settlement, which is what we all want. And then third, by saying that the United States won't implement no-fly zones in this context, largely because of Russian nuclear capabilities, you signal to the rest of the world and all the other nefarious actors in the world that the United States will not use military force when, if you have a nuclear trump card in your back pocket, and that's a very dangerous message to send to the world.
I wanted to ask you about that because, you know, it does, I guess it would send a message to North Korea and Iran, but it's true. I mean, once somebody has a nuclear weapon, the calculations differ.
Sure, the calculations do differ. You do have to be more cautious about it. There are times when you would want to still use military force. And it's not, I think, in the United States' best interest to say to message so quite as clearly as like, if you have this, then we will not do that, because that just encourages bad behavior.
You say, Rafi, in your op-ed, quote, while a no-fly zone policy incurs significant risks, there are several steps on the escalatory ladder between that and World War III. What are those steps, and are they worth the risk? Sure.
So the steps are basically, one, the Russians would have to choose to challenge it. That's a choice on their part. Second, we would have to choose to shoot the Russian aircraft down. And then third, the question is, does violence from there become sort of tit for tat and localized to Ukraine, or does it spiral into a larger conflict? Now, the possibility of spiraling into a larger conflict is real. There's also arguments, however, to say that you would want to that both sides would want to keep the conflict localized to Ukraine, if nothing else, to prevent the mutual annihilation. You know, political scientists will talk about how nuclear weapons will have sort of grandiose stability, i.e. both countries will not try to destroy each other, but you still will get these sort of smaller conflicts So you may very well see that latter dynamic play out rather than a priori go to World War III like some of the rhetoric has suggested they would.
How good are Ukraine's air defenses currently, and how destructive has Russia's air power actually been?
Sure. So Ukrainian air defenses are performing far better than I think any Western analyst anticipated prior to the conflict. The fact that Russia has not been able to gain air superiority, I think, is both testament to the Ukrainian air defenses on the one hand, probably also testament to the fact that the VKAs, as the Russian Air Force, is not quite as good as we thought they were. So in that sense, from an operational perspective, you can make an argument saying that a no-fly zone isn't needed right now. That's different than the messaging and the sort of public policy perspective.
Is there any military support that the U.S. could give to Ukraine that it hasn't already?
Yes.
Some people are talking about drones as well.
Yeah, so there's a drones question. There's also, there's been discussion about transferring Slovakia's S-300 and Turkey's S-400 systems. These are Russian air defense systems. What those would allow the Ukrainians to do is to shoot down aircraft that are at a higher altitude and farther away than what they currently have, which, you know, the Stinger is a great system, but it is designed primarily for short-range air defense. So you can talk about longer range air defenses, so which would be sort of the next step in protecting the skies.
All right, Rafi, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future Government Matters interviews.